Welcome to part 2. We're excited you're here to continue the conversation with us. Let's dive right in and pick up where we left off.
Go ahead.
First one, how did you deal with getting kicked twice?
I'm very literal, as you can tell by the way I speak.
How did you manage to actually, work with this months of no feedback? What did you actually do or not do? Because I imagine no one is telling that, let's change something, let's work on it or something like that.
Yeah.
How did you approach that?
So the first mistake we made was we assumed that customers equals cases. What I mean by that is we thought we sign up with big insurance carriers. We sign up with really well-known law firms. If they sign contracts with us, they probably also place cases with us. This must happen, right? Fully misunderstood the situation. It's not. That's why there's a field called customer success, because just because you have a customer doesn't necessarily mean that those worries out for them. But again, naive, first-time founders, didn't really know about that. So the first thing we did was we focused on that. So we would call them up every month and ask, did you present this to your client? Where's the struggle? Is it on the technical side? Is it on a communication side? Is it on a psychological level? Is there something we can do about? And that already would help us a lot to understand, for instance, with the insurance carriers, to learn there's a very complicated and large net of law firms and providers set behind big insurance companies that actually do the work. So not just by signing the insurance carrier, you would get actual cases from them, but you would also have to convince the people they work with in order to make this happen. And with the law firms, it was that they said to us, look, we really like what you do. I mean, we developed it with you. I think this is really smart. Yet my clients, they're really hesitant, and I cannot tell them yet success stories because I didn't use your system before. So we would come back to the catch-22 problem where we'd say, yeah, we also can't really help here. And so that was part one. We just literally called the customers up we've had and said, guys, what can we do? What did you learn out of it that we can change on the product side? And the other thing we did was we just reached out to people and asked them for expert interviews, which weren't real cases then, but they were with people who would have real cases. And so every time we would product demo the case, we would do actual cases with them. So, and that's something I still do until today. So per week, I do 10 to 20 of those cases on the platform, and you would learn a lot from their feedback. And so we just use the time to do that. Yet at the same time, it's highly frustrating. You have to keep the team motivated, which does not only consist of co-founders who are incentivized by nature, ideally, but also of employees. And you really have to be gentle with them and be patient and make them understand that this is neither their fault, nor does this necessarily invalidate the idea that it will work one day. It is just the plain truth of what happens when you try to do something where there's a track record of people failing for the past 20 years of bringing this kind of a platform to life. And so all of these kind of things, we would stumble in naively. We would just try to give it a go, see where it would bring us, debate a lot, discuss a lot, what could be perhaps paths. And then you just, to some extent, need a sheer portion of luck. That's something that is not neglectable.
What I really like about your story, or like is a bit of a neutral term in this regard, is that usually I have a question of, hey, how would you help other teams, new startups, to accelerate their process?
Yes.
What you're just saying is keep calm. At least from my perspective now, don't rush into things. You cannot accelerate everything.
It's really hard on a founder's soul to do that. Where I would distinguish is where I'm coming back to that you have hair on fire problems. Take, for instance, the necessity for companies with more than 500 people these days to do ESG balance sheeting, these kind of things. They need it to do it within 2025. So they need to find a provider there. When you solve that kind of a problem, you clearly need to be fast. Because this is a market where by default you will find direct competitors, because you're not the only one to notice that there is a large pain point that needs to be addressed very soon. So when you solve that kind of a problem, I would always say you better be a sprinter and you better be good at it. Whilst when you solve a hard fact problem, you do a lot of educational things. You have to just stretch out the money you have to survive as long as it takes to show first validation that would allow you to raise the second round, which by, again, default will be way longer than with a hair and fire problem. And so you would be more of a marathon guy. So you would have to be really good at surviving on a very low cash burn for a long period of time and keep everybody on board. This also includes investor relations. Like, make your investors understand for the first 3 months, we didn't have a single case. Congratulations. They were really patient with us. I never, to this day, struggled with my investors about this, because we only made that clear from the start to set what we do is something that will take a lot of time. If it works out, it will be very, very valuable. But please be patient with me, because I will not be able to change the field of law overnight. And so that's why when you operate in this field, you have to get everybody on track. I can say this now. I was not as clever at the time I first raised money, and I was not as clever at the time we set the company live. So that's something I can say now wholeheartedly, with the caveat of making clear this is something I learned the very, very hard way.
But you learned it. Okay.
Eventually. It's a lot about learning. Yes.
It's because I just remember the comment you made, like when you were basically betting on yourself, like there's going to be someone on the platform when you start, and the investors were the ones telling you no.
One investor in particular.
Yeah.
Yes.
You convinced him, or did you know already?
He knew, but he was fine with it. He was like, they're going to probably fall right on their nose, but I'm just going to let it happen. Yeah.
They invested on the team, or the idea. What do you think? It's always a thing that we encounter, especially if we are early stage startup. Usually VCs do not invest into a specific idea, more the team that is trying to solve a specific one that might pivot. What do you think about yourself in that regard?
So first of all, clarification here, we don't have any venture capitalists in yet. It's entirely raised by business angels so far.
Oh, okay.
So that's the first important step. So I talk to a lot of VCs. I would say I have a good standing with a couple of those and a quite personal relationship, but none of them are invested yet in what we are doing, which is in part because legal tech, as one pointed out, is an uphill case. It's not sexy. It's not something you would right away jump onto. And so that's the first struggle I would find. The second one is we are first-time founders. That's also something usually not as attractive as somebody who built something previously, regardless of whether it was successful or not, because in any case, they would learn a lot, what we just talked about. And the third thing that we realized whilst building this out is in the first place, with this hard fact problem, you don't need the amount of money classic venture capitalists would put into it, because it is not something where you need a lot of people, but where you just need a lot of time and patience with it. And so venture capitalists, for good reason or bad, they would expect when they come in for things to get really fast. And at the time that we needed first money, because we couldn't live from the idea itself, at that point, we knew we wouldn't get the traction they needed to say this is something we want right now. When we come to the point to raise a seed round, ideally we have a good traction in terms of not amounts of money that we already made in revenue with the cases, but just to validate that this actually is something people use and they're very happy about using it.
Okay. I really love the way that everything developed in the site. And when talking about developing, I think always about the actual prototype. Yeah, the thing that you were developing. Mm-hmm. How did you approach that? Like, how did you decide what to build actually? How fast did it go? Did you use specific tools to be very fast with it? Or did you take your time? What was your strategy to actually implement your ideas?
So as the neutral provider in a legal dispute in our specific case, but more broadly as a neutral, we realized that we have to be independent from other players. And this also reflects in the way we build the product. We try to rely as little as possible on outside resources and outside service providers. For instance, in the first version, the authentication service Many people would use OAuth or a clerk. We built it ourselves because there would be a point where data would be communicated. And one of the key arguments that we bring is whatever data you give to us is confidential and we keep it safe. And so that is reflected in the way we built the product, that we allowed ourselves a bit more time here and there to build it out in a way that allows us to be in the driver's seat. Is this always the right way? Clearly not. I mean, it is very closely linked to what we do, which is the reason why it made sense for us. The other thing I learned, again, being a lawyer by training, software developers, again, nothing you don't learn in law school, again, for good reasons. But the thing that comes with it is that Philip, as the IT dude in the founding team, he had to tell us and lecture us a lot of things where we as the lawyers would say, yeah, but isn't that easy? And he would then explain to us, no, it's not. And this is something we have to think about. And these might be risks entailed to it. And so that's something where, again, we didn't really know much about, where we just had to muddle our way through and find a way that works for us.
Successfully, I guess. Okay.
It does. And I think what the great thing is about, you would see in the debates that we have about the product, that Philip has a laser clear view on. He tries to keep things lean. He tries to build things out in a manner that are maintainable long term, even if we would have a 4 or 5 digit number of cases per month. So you would see him have a very broad vision and not telling us, no, we can't do it, but rather asking us, like, is this really needed? Is this our priority right now? And oftentimes we would shy away then and say, well, and then we think about it. And this in particular applies to me. There are a lot of things where I think, oh, this would look amazing. We should do this. The very classic version where the salesy guy tells the product guy, we need this. I'm pretty sure we can sell it twice as good if we have these 5 features. And he would then push me back and say, okay, but how sure are you that these features, I will add something here? And it's a back and forth all the time. Anybody who would deny that, in my view, must be lying. It is not the case. Or please then reach out to me and tell me how to do it. I'll be very happy to learn and become better at it.
One of the main sources for this to decide what to improve the features and stuff like that are usually coming from sales. Yeah, they have the direct contact to the customers usually, and then funnel it through.
That's also a challenging part. What is important to us, put it this way, is that we all operate within one room. So we are not a remote first company. In fact, I would say we have an attendance north of 90% of people at the office every day, because it allows us to have that communication between the person who does the sales calls with the one who builds the product, just looking off the table and saying, look, I talked to that client this morning and something's still on my mind. What do you think about it? And if you're a big company, you can do whatever you want, be as remote as you like. But when you are just a small nucleus, I believe then it is really relevant. Everybody of that team sits in the same room and talks about and discusses things all the time. So it would often happen that somebody would snip and say, look, I have an idea. Everybody would go to the whiteboard. We would talk about it for 10 minutes. Think it's good, think it's bad, find a way. Everybody would go back to the desks and continue with it. And that allows a very, very short process between the person who gets the feedback and the one that has to build something from it.
And this goes into every aspect of the company, yeah? So I guess the pricing, for instance, is something that's certainly highly complex. I guess your approach is the same way?
Again, that was something we learned a lot at Unternehmertum. I remember very well having very, very extensive sales workshops with very, very clever people. And in our field, you would have to also navigate through a lot of legal requirements. How are you allowed to build? Can you structure something in parallel to how it is done before the courts? Or do you purposefully don't want to do that because you say, well, we want to be the antidote to what the courts do? Eventually, this is the story we tell. Courts and lawyers, they have really difficult to understand fee schedules and everything. And so our platform is plain and simple. You pay a small amount of money to file the case with us. At the moment, it's $30. And then you only pay us when we deliver the settlement. And it is a percentage of what you settle for. So it's super simple. It's super straightforward. It goes across different fields of law that we operate. And it allows flexibility in terms of, do you settle for a couple of €100 or do you settle for a couple of €1,000? And that's just something that took a long, long while, because you have so many options of how you can structure it. And clearly this is not the holy grail. We'll probably find 5 other versions within the next 2 or 3 years. But that's something that we felt comfortable starting with.
Let's talk about the future of your company.
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned from your side is that you had a specific solution for a specific problem. You wanted to tackle this one. Do you have something greater in mind? You said just a few moments ago that you want to be the antidote of that what's happened at court. I think that's a really cool thing to have a narrative around a story, actually. Is this part of it? Do you have one? Do you want to go different places?
Okay, so essentially I see 3 directions. The first one is geographically. Right now we focus on the German jurisdiction, but one of the beauties of the product is that it is detached from a specific legal system. What I mean by that is most jurisdictions around the world have the idea of a settlement agreement with different form requirements, different content requirements, but essentially they have that. And so one of the directions we want to go in, and I can hint we already do that at the moment, is that we go into other jurisdictions and we help in other fields of law. So that is one direction you might take. The second one is data. What I mean by that is, in the field of law, take judgments, for instance. Only about 2% of judgments in Germany are at the moment publicly accessible. Perhaps a slightly bigger percentage is digitalized. And when we talk about settlements specifically, you don't really have any documentation at the moment. So nobody knows right now what is the ideal amount of money that people would settle their legal dispute for. And so the spinning wheel long-term behind that product could be that if we just do that often enough with enough people willing to use our platform, we could be the single source of truth of really knowing when people cave in and when they settle their dispute. And the third direction this might head into is the product itself. This can relate to the fields of law that we operate in. We currently negotiate projects in other fields of law domestically. This could also be that we come up with different mechanisms of dispute resolution. What I mean by that is, if you have a sufficiently large amount of data, again, on past cases, you could probably come to a point where if you combine a large language model with the case data we have, you could have a real exchange between parties on a text-generated basis where a bot essentially negotiates between parties amongst multiple factors an agreement. So it would essentially be a fully automated mediator that can operate both in terms of text, and phone could also be. So phone mediation could happen. These are the kind of things that would be possible, but they largely depend on the second direction. So it's essentially a 3-dimensional perspective that I see where we could head into.
Yeah. But all of these are very much product perspectives.
Yes.
In regard of greater vision behind it. When you see a startup, it's always a bit of a North Star where a team wants to go to align when specific decisions are going to be made. For instance,
yes,
when you want to, simple things like whom to partner with.
Yes.
Occasionally we have SDG topics. You're a lawyer,
Yeah.
so I guess you have a bit more neutral aspect to it, but it's your thing.
So the first thought is it's oftentimes overlooked, but access to justice is linked to the sustainability development goals. So it has some sort of relevance for that. The second thought from my side is, if you would ask me for a vision statement for 2030, it would be people's first choice in dispute resolution. We have that kind of a statement. But it's often too bland and too broad for people to do something with this. Why I tell these 3 directions. And beyond that, I would say what we want to do is change the way people argue and fight.
This is the one that I was looking for.
There we go.
Yeah, this is you want to change the way, because this actually resonated with me. Like, hey, let's target the thing before things escalate, the way where you have the bottleneck. Yeah, this is what I really, really love about your solution. When I was
That's also the biggest challenge. To make people change their behavior is one of the most intricate things you can do.
Yeah, you're a psychologist. You know about that. Yeah, I work with ritual dynamics. I know about these topics.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why that resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, really cool. So now we know what you're going to head to. Thing I was wondering is, what do you think was your actual greatest challenge in convincing yourself to go this direction? Yeah, to see, okay, I had the opportunity to go work as a lawyer, opportunity to go the startup direction. At some point, I imagine there's a bit of a decision making in life, which way you want to go, because sometimes we ask startups, imagine you are not working in a startup now. What would you do? The simple answer in your case might be, I'd be a lawyer, but I don't think so. But that's up to you. What is it?
So in the first place, I don't think that it was a lifelong decision. It might turn out to be one. Let's see how successful this company is. But what I'm trying to say about that is I finished up my legal education university. Yeah. What would follow now would be 2 years of training contracts, and then I would be fully admitted lawyer. Yeah. And nobody by means of law prevents me of continuing this path in some years. In fact, most people with good grades in their state bar, after the first state bar, stop and do a PhD for 2 or 3 years. They study a year abroad and do a Master of Laws. So it is not uncommon to step out of the classic track for some time. And so that's the way I perceived it at the time we decided to do this full time. And I thought to myself, okay, perhaps others, they write a PhD that's stuck somewhere in a library and ideally somebody reads it one day. You can do that, but you could also build a company and see if that's something that helps 1 or 2 people at a time. But now, fortunately, I can say I helped 1 or 2 people at a time, successfully, which is an amazing feeling. I cannot describe how great it was when we had the first successful case, and we drank Jägermeister. I had small ones in my cupboard, and when I saw in the system, okay, it was like, now we have to choose, and so. It's an amazing feeling. And when I compare that to spending 2 or 3 years in the library, at the time we decided, to me, it was more prevailing. To me, it was like, I don't lose anything. I only gain an option that others in my field of education probably don't see. Or, which is also likely, are too afraid to do. With the being too afraid of to do something part, that would be my second limb of argument. Again, being very naive about it. I didn't struggle with that. Like, you would give away financial security. You would move across the country without knowing what will happen to you. You would dive into a system of people that have so different, oftentimes great skills that you lack. For some reason that is really strange, it never occurred to me that this would be a problem. What I was afraid of, and I remain to be afraid of, is whether this will actually work at large scale, whether we can survive long enough to make this happen. That's the part I'm still worried about. But I was not worried about at the time that I decided to do that. Because at the time I just thought, this is cool, let's just give it a try and see where things will end. And if you ask many of my friends from university, from school, whatever, they would always say, yeah, that was so clear that you're going to do that. To me, it wasn't. And I think this is a hindsight bias that was clear to nobody at the start.
Yeah.
But they all say now, yeah, that doesn't surprise any of us that you decided to step out of the system.
Interesting. It was surprising to me. Huh?
Yeah, it was nothing I planned. At the time that we applied for Experters, I was still very sure I'm going to be working at a law firm just a kilometer down from here, where I have a great mentor that I really like. And that's what I'm going to do until the end of my days.
Actually, I guess this is a thing that can be a shout out to basically a lot of experts in any field. I'm not a psychologist, as I said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like just jump out of the standard process of education of what the career is supposed to be like and try something. You think this is a problem that needs solving.
For a year or two.
For a year or two, it won't destroy your career. On the contrary, it makes you actually unique
Yeah.
or more you.
And when you think about it, at the time that we stepped out of the classic traits of how a lawyer gets educated, we didn't have much private money placed down on the side. Not at all, to be honest. We were students when we started this out. To pay the first money to go to the notary to set up a small UG, which was not even a GmbH at the time, that was something challenging. Even though it's not a lot of money, we struggled with it. And so despite the surrounding factors, now looking back at it and reflecting with you about it, is really stupid. It was a great decision. Like to live now here, to have actual employees that strive for the same mission you have, to have customers that say, wow, this is cool, to have clients that use your platform. It is still teeny tiny. It is not big, it is not large, but we make progress, actual progress. We actually solve real legal disputes. If you would have told me that at the time we started Expertist, I probably barely believed it. It's very strange. It's either I thought we want to be 20 steps further, and at the same time, I would not probably have believed you that it worked.
Yeah.
Both happen at the same time.
It's just a bit of having actual agency and see it.
Yeah.
You react to the world and you can make a change within your.
And I would do so many things across this path differently. But it's not something that I regret, but it's something that tells me that I learned something from.
You have the perfect thing that I was going to ask you.
Go ahead.
That's exactly that. What are those steps you think in hindsight? I could have made it differently, should have made it different. I know I enjoyed the journey. I know I learned a lot from it. Some things are a process. Understanding, like, okay, I needed to do these steps. That's for sure. Can include those, of course. But what are those things for people that think about founding a startup or are not yet really in contact with the idea of doing it? Here in Munich, you get really a lot of opportunities to get in touch with the idea of founding a company one way or the other. In the other cities, it's not the case. But we are now a digital, let's say, more digital, so you can spread the word. Things are happening. What would be advice you would provide?
The first one was we founded the company itself too early, which is because we, at the time, more than these days, were just classic lawyers who thought if we build a company, we have to have a vehicle for it. I wouldn't. It was the reason we couldn't get exist funding, because we started the company and set up the company while still being in university. Nobody told us, because nobody in law school ever tells you about exist. I think if you would go there, 1 out of 100 would know what it is. And that would require that there is no vehicle yet incorporated. So by the time we looked into it, it was clear, well, that's gone. That could have been a great way to finance ourselves in the first time. It was gone. That was a really harsh feeling. It also meant that for a lot of investors, especially in the VC side, the company appeared to be old because it was incorporated in June 2022. We only started to work on it full-time and actually develop an MVP by March 23. So to them, by the time we would raise, they would look at it and say, where's the traction? Where's the platform? Like, what the fuck did you do? And we could answer and say, well, we founded it while it's being in university, but oftentimes there is a strong herd effect. And so they wouldn't really listen to it carefully. And so that's 2 negative consequences out of it. There's one positive at the same time, just to highlight it briefly. For our clients, it makes them, it looks like the company is pretty old already for startup standards. Yeah. And if you survive up to that point, it can't be too stupid. So that's the upside to it. So that's the first one I would do differently. The second one would be, I would probably exhaust public funding to a larger extent. Nowadays we do it. It is easy to me because often it's a lot of legal German. And if you understand legalese, you get along with it. But Exist is just one out of many programs that could be used. So is AI plus Munich. That can really help you at the very, very early start. And I think there is more than often meets the eye. And for founders, it is a field that they don't want to dive into because it looks unsexy. It's with public institutions. It's complicated. It's something nasty. And so they oftentimes avoid it, which in my view means you have especially as first-time founders doing your first round, you have a less strong bargaining position with your investors because you need the money. There's no way around. But when you know you got some cash on the side, which we never had privately, we never had a good business angel network by the time we started, so we couldn't elevate something from that position. It is probably the best way you can use to say to people, look, I don't need your money next week. We can continue that conversation for a good period of time, and I'd probably find somebody else who would put money in first. So in my view, it increases the bargaining position you have with your first investors. And investment generally is something we learned a lot. I wouldn't, as a first-time founder in a field that is not the hype of the day, I wouldn't talk to venture capitalists in the first place. I wouldn't. They're great from seed level onwards, but when you do this for the first time, and unless you're a fucking genius with an IQ higher than Einstein and 2 co-founders who went to MIT and Harvard, they probably will not do it eventually. I would rather do a proper angel round at the start with people you trust and that understand what you want to do, and then build connections with investors following the pre-seed up to the seed round, but not with the necessity of bringing them on board already pre-seed, but with the idea in mind to say, I want to build something, I want to keep you in the loop so that by the time we raise a seed, you see what we've done in the meantime, you can see the progress, and we already have a strong bond. And that's something I do with a number of venture capital funds that I talked to, and that was my mistake during our pre-seed, that said funny stuff, but you don't have any traction. You're pre-product, pre-revenue. What are you doing? Which helps me now because they ask every couple of months, when's the next round coming up? What's happening with you? What's good? What doesn't work? And so that's something I would approach very differently these days. Again, only being a first-time founder in a field that is not the hype of the day. That's something I would do different. I would probably be able to continue that for a long period of time, but perhaps I stick to the examples.
One more.
Okay. And
you made me curious.
The first hire sets the culture for the next 10, and the first 10 set the culture for the next 20. I'm not yet at the first 10. I must be clear here. But I heard this a couple of months ago, and it resonated with me because the first person we hired full time was a really lucky punch, in the sense that it is somebody, and that's something I would do, things very entrepreneurially. But I think it was sheer luck, because we didn't have the money to hire a big agency to find us somebody who spends some time in a big corporate or a very famous startup. But we literally just put it on LinkedIn and looked who's coming up. I'm pretty sure this could have gone very wrong. And so this is a positive example for once. And that worked out well eventually. But at the same time, we also had struggles with team members where we realized it doesn't work for numerous reasons. And so I would be very, very, very carefully, and I don't mean just content-wise. I don't care if somebody works for us, what their grades in uni were. I want to understand whether they think entrepreneurially, whether they are willing to go beyond what perhaps is what they are obliged to do, but they're actually willing to go the extra mile. In a small team like that, it's super relevant. And when you find these kind of people, the rest can really fall aside. But it's so crucial because it is the backbone of what you said earlier. Investors invest in founders, which I believe to a large extent is true for angels and for venture capitalists. But the first employees you get on board, they are the backbone to that, because they are essentially the extended founder team. They have to go to the same really weird struggles that you go through to a lesser extent, but yet they have to be able to digest that. And with us, as I've pointed out, this was hard at the start. And so you need them to have a very similar mindset to what you do, yet at the same time, ideally not start their own company within the next 12 months. So otherwise, it's going to be a very short employment process. But that's something I would look very, very, very carefully into.
Very nice one. A last thing,
Yes.
a good decision you made. I just came up with that, like, okay, this was actually good to do it that way. Is there something?
I mean, the first employee is a positive example of that. Past that point, I think a good decision was we at the start when we built out the product, we thought employment law is the one thing we should do for. And as founders, you should stick to one thing really and really do this all the way laws. Yes, focus. Deeply ingrained. Yet, one of our insurance carriers that we work with said, I don't buy it. I want to do a different field of law. I want to do tenancy law. I want to do helping people to get their deposit back. And at the time, we thought they pay us a really fair amount of money to do that. It's probably not our focus. We're just going to get it done. And that's it. Turns out, fast forward 12 months, that this is the use case where we get more cases from than from the other. So if I would have not listened to the advice, which was really also a piece of good advice, it was not that they were harsh on us. They were just saying, we believe this is the better one. If I would have not listened to them, we would have probably cut ourselves away a good part of cases that provided a lot of happy feelings to the clients and to us. And so that was a really good decision too. And that eventually, when you boil it down, is literally just listening to what your customers want and say, if that's what you want, just go for it and build it. And that's what we did. And that was a really good decision.
Understand what they say to basically reflect on it and have a bit of an idea if it makes sense or not.
And take away your own ego of saying, no, I know this better. I think this is the right way. No, you don't. If this is what your customer wants, and if this is something they are willing to pay for, it doesn't matter whether you believe it's the right track or not. You do it, you show it. If it works as it did in our case, that's amazing. And if it doesn't, you can still go back and say, look, it was what you wanted. I stick to it. I happily did. I doubt that this can really be something you blame on me. Unfortunately, I didn't have to come to that point. But that was, I think, really good. Another good decision, I would say, is we early on were very good at marketing what we do. So many founders, when they go out, what they think about is I have to go to fairs. I have to post myself on LinkedIn. And I think what we did well was we were in the Wirtschaftswoche. We were in the Handelsblatt. We got featured by many of the people that work with us, both on their websites and on their LinkedIn accounts. So I would estimate that by the time we launched, within the first week, we were able to address an audience probably north of 20,000 people, which was largely to the fact that we planned this out very carefully for 2.5 months. And due to the fact that I did public relations for an NGO before. So I worked with ZDF and ARD and did these kind of things, which helped us a lot because it's often a field where founders say, I don't care much for it, which again, for some business models can be the absolute right approach. But for what we do, a platform model where you start out with people writing about it, then people using it, then people reviewing it, having some sort of a public perception of what you're doing and being able to legitimize what you're doing with publications like a Wirtschaftswoche is something that gives a lot of reputation to what we do. And reputation usually, ideally, translates into trust. And trust is at core right next to confidentiality and legal compliance when we talk about what we are doing. So that worked well for us, I believe, because we knew outright that this is something where what we do might be different from what a lot of other companies would have to do in order to position themselves on the market.
It's so amazing when I have to think about all the other podcasts that we did. If I have to highlight 3 words that have come up all the
Yes.
time, it's entrepreneurship, AI, and trust.
Yes.
It's always a topic where you need to go to. You need to build up the trust to your customer base. You need to build up trust that what you're doing is something that's really, really worth it, and you're an integer individual, and especially in law. There,
And that's the point I would have made, to say it is broadly speaking relevant, but to a larger extent in the specific domain that we operate in. And I mean, just think about it. You would have a dispute with your employer yourself. You would get terminated. You would lose your job.
Yeah.
It's a really emotional, difficult situation. And so it goes for moving out of the apartment and being told you don't get your money back. And so it is so much about being able to rely on what we are doing, that we knew that. We still underestimated it.
Yeah.
We knew it at least. And therefore, and with founders, perhaps to add that point on top, I sometimes got asked, are you like a lifestyle founder? Which tells a lot about the perception people have of founders, broadly speaking. And the clear answer is no. I do that because I firmly believe in it. I'm the classic geek who comes from the field of dispute resolution, being a jurist by training. I don't do that for lifestyle, but because some people do, and because this is what's stuck then publicly, you have a hard time arguing that you are the right solution. And I would often hear fellow founders saying that their customers say, yeah, do I know whether you still exist in 12 months? But that's at the same time something where founders really have to be trustworthy, but where I believe there also has to be a change in the way that we approach innovation here as a society. And that's something that makes me very worried. And that is something that is very different to other markets that we currently negotiate projects, where it's not the first instinct to say, is this safe? But the first instinct is, am I still the first one you're showing this to? Or am I the second? And it's so different. And the culture of failing is so much better that trust, to my understanding, is a two-way street.
Just thought about, like, you're basically in a situation where trust was lost because people are in dispute that's not solvable anymore. You provide a platform. It's trustworthy to do that. I really like that. Okay, but I think we need to go to the end.
Yes.
There's a thing at the very end that we do occasionally. Michael introduced that, and I really like it. That's called the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
It's just a few very small on point questions. You just answer with a word, a sentence, just directly.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do that?
Sure.
To it? Amazing. I love it.
I was looking for do you know the AB game?
Not yet.
There's a really great podcast called Alles Gesagt by Zeit.
Yeah.
And what they play is a game where you have two options. And what they trigger is, if you are familiar with Daniel Kahneman, they want to trigger your system one. So they want you to respond intuitively and to not think about the answer. So I would say cat, dog.
Yeah.
What would be what you say?
Yeah.
And then like rain, sun.
Yeah.
Mountains, oceanside, whatever. And it would tell you a lot about the people.
Yeah.
By virtue of what they respond to. But
I know that this is in regard. It's similar. The thing is, what I really love is like a tool, like a red hammer. Usually you use two things. Mine was a green chainsaw. So
that's very picturesque, if you ask me. But I'm happy to play the game.
Let's play the game. Okay, so what's one thing AI can't replace in the legal system?
Legal reasoning.
What's the biggest myth about AI in legal tech?
That it's only about large language models.
What helps you to reset your mind after work?
Long distance running.
What book or resource helped you most as a founder?
I would say Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow.
If you could settle one global issue instantly, no resource limitations, what would it be?
access to justice. I'm on it.
What's the most surprising thing you learned about legal disputes?
How intimate they are.
One word that best describes your startup journey.
Bumpy.
It was amazing having you here. Thank you so much for joining, having these conversations. I learned a lot and enjoyed myself a lot. I hope our listeners did as well. I'm very much certain they did. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your time.